Thursday morning episode of The Link. Here we are on April the 21st, everybody. Jason Salas, Joser, and Uncle Kin. And look who just happened to pop into the KUM News Zoom room on a Thursday morning. It's our dear friend, Rlene Steffy, the cultural ethnographer, but more so a mentor to all of us in journalism and a dear, dear friend, and a podcaster extraordinaire who is going to talk about her latest episode. And Art, first of all, good morning, half a day. So good to see you. And this topic is impressive and crazy, and I mean that like with all due respect. Someone who's an expert in the topic of language.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be back, and thank you for asking me.
And so you actually found this. So the person you're interviewing is Thomas Stoltz. Stoltz, right? It's Thomas Stoltz, PhD. How exactly did you meet the professor? And at what point did you guys start talking about like language? And obviously you've got a very vested interest in promoting and investigating the history and the true history, I guess I would say, of the Chamorro language and how it's evolved over the years. And how did his feedback gel with what your research has taught you?
It's interesting because I think that all the work that's being done here on Guam is aimed at that. We are all curious as to the peopling of the Marianas. If you remember Itinauta Marianas, when we started that program, the goal was to try to determine the origin of the people that came here. Now, those people were not Chamorro. It's just easy to say Chamorro because that's what we say to identify who we are. But that identity is not who they were. We have become that today, and we are their they are our ancestors, but the scholars in archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, genetics have equal interest in the populating of Oceania, the migration, why the migration. And so I met Thomas Stoltz in 2007, and I sat down and interviewed him. And every time he's been to Guam, I've sat down and interviewed him. And we've just always kept in touch, and he's a really willing scholar to partake and to share what he knows. And he's not afraid to get into the dialogue of things. His interest in other languages help him to make assessments about the Chamorro language. And there are so many things about our language that we will never know because of the lack of written documentation or historical information pertaining to our language or the development of our people. And so we consistently get into a dialogue of, trying to surmise what this language is, how this language became. And it's a quandary for many of the scholars because in the Austronesian language family, there are 1,200 different languages. But Chamorro, in and of itself, doesn't belong to any one of those languages. It's not a puzzle that they can say, oh, it fits in this one. No, it doesn't. So all the oceanic families, including, peoples, including Hawaii, are Austronesian speaking people. But Chamorro doesn't fit into any of those languages. It's almost as if its isolation has sprouted a totally different tree, if you will. And so it cannot fit into the models. And I think to some degree, they've kind of thrown their hands up on the ancient time and said, well, let's not worry about that anymore because it's not that easy, or maybe it will reveal itself in time. Let's focus on the modern Chamorro. And so what they did was, the historical nature of Stoltz's work was, at first, as a German scholar and a linguist, fascinating. I said, what kind of a kid were you? At elementary school, he invented his own language. And I said, were you bored? And it was interesting because he said, I don't know, I never really took any journals or anything, but it was his thing. Some people just have, some people get into math. Some people like to draw. Some people, make languages. And he said, linguistics is not something that you can develop into. You either want it or you don't. So it's a gift. And his wife is a linguist, very interestingly.
Huh.
So anyway, what he tried to do initially was to see how language contact, meaning like if you, like the three of us, for example, today, if we met for the first time and we all speak different languages, or maybe two of us speak and the other one doesn't, then that initial contact would introduce a language to the other two, and you would introduce a language to me. So what he said was, in the work that he's done, the research he did, was trying to see how Spanish had impacted other languages as Spain colonized different areas. And he found that in every instance, there was an assimilation or similarity in how the Spanish language changed the contact language, or the language that it contacted with. And that led him to the Philippines. And then in the Philippines, he discovered a dictionary that said it was a Chamorro dictionary. And he said, what is this? And he'd heard of it, but never knew really about the Chamorro language. So that investigation led him to introduce Chamorro as one of the topics that he teaches in Bremen. And then he came here and he works very closely with Rosa Palomo at the university. And I am very close to Rosa because of the work we do. You know that, Ken.
Sure.
And also with Ken's sister, Terry Flores. So they have helped to assisted me in the publications and in the Chamorro language, and they're my defaults when it comes to, and Anne-Marie Arceo, they're my defaults when it comes to defining or spelling of the orthography, and they're champions in this area. And so she said, hey, Thomas Stoltz is here. He's doing an investigation. Students are interviewing people in Inalahan. Would you like to interview him? And I said, of course I would. And so that started our long friendship. And he always responds. He's very responsive. Look at the credentials this man has. He's well published. I mean, in academia, you publish or die. That's the mantra. Publish or die.
And be cited. I mean, anyone can write a paper, but it's how many people actually cite you in their work going forward. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but and that's a very good point, by the way, and I'll get back to that. But publish or die, and yet publish what, right? And so he's very he's into different languages, Maltese, and he's German and whatever. So he's certainly someone we cannot ignore when it comes to our language. And I just, now that I'm back on the podcast, I want to help to share this knowledge, not only with the people here in Guam, but people who are interested. And I brought up Miguel Bavacua's effort to try to teach the Chamorro language to adults now. And that was a topic of this conversation. Just where can you go as an adult learning the Chamorro language, or any language for that matter? Mm-hmm. It becomes, you're not a native speaker if you learn the language as an adult. Because native speaker, by definition, is someone who learns it from infancy up, and someone who will be able to be creative in that language. So as an adult, when you learn it, you learn what is taught to you, and you're only as good as your teacher, right? So, and then your ability to utilize that language becomes limited, restricted to what you've been taught, rather than natural way of learning it, speaking it at home, and then the progression into developing the language further. And so that came up when I said, I'm baffled sometimes about how we can't name things anymore as Chamorros, and many of that's because native speakers are the only ones really with the capacity to increase and expand a language because they learned it from their infancy up. And so this discussion we had, the poignant part is that it is the responsibility of the parent, the native speaker, parent, to teach the children from infancy up so that it becomes a native speaker, and it becomes the responsibility of the community to be engaged, to be determined, and to be aligned with this value system of making sure that a particular language is not doesn't die. Now, we're not the only ones, by the way, and that was a very interesting discovery that I came about with him. Was we're not the only ones in the world who has a threatened language, and that's because there are what he calls affluent or dominant or economic languages, as we know the English. Mm-hmm. And he is not a proponent of anti-English, which I find refreshing, because you can't blame people for doing things that they believe will improve their lives. We talked about this in private of a friend of ours who's made a decision to change. And so this action, this decision is a personal decision, and we make it all the time. We do what's best for us. So to engage in a language, to choose a foreign language, tomorrow will either become a foreign language to people, but unless you teach it from infancy up, and unless the community, and I mean the family, the community, the extension into the schools, all the way up to the University of Guam, and the support of the politicians, unless we're all on the same ship, this thing ain't going to sail very far.
All right. Well, we do want to play a little bit of a clip for this fascinating discussion about language and the way it should be taught. So this is Rlene from the Rlene Live podcast, which is available right now. So please subscribe to it. Absolutely amazing stuff from an absolutely amazing woman. It's on Spotify, on Pandora, on Apple Podcasts. So here is a clip from Rlene's discussion with Professor Thomas Stoltz.
It fascinates me to speak to you all the time. I enjoyed our first interview, and now I wanted to follow through these many years later, what you've done with the Chamorro language. Could you tell us why you were even interested, or what introduced you to the Chamorro language?
Yeah, it's let's say it was a little detour to Chamorro. I was interested in language contact phenomena. So what can happen to languages when they are in contact with each other? There is a prestige language that influences another language. A lot of things happen. It's interesting for linguistic theory and so on. I won't go too deeply into that.
Right.
And at that time, I was studying Mesoamerican languages mostly, and many of them, Mexico, for instance, have been under heavy influence, massive borrowing from Spanish. So Spanish played a major role in shaping the grammar and lexicon of these languages as they are today. And what I saw at that time was that languages which belong to different families and are spoken at different places in Mexico and all over the place in Mesoamerica and also South America borrow the same elements from Spanish, no matter to what family they belong.
Wow.
Then I observed the same in some of the languages of the Philippines, Tagalog and so on. And I came across a dictionary of the Chamorro language, and I thought, there are hundreds of Spanish words in the language. It's an interesting language for me. I never heard about Chamorro before that. I heard about it, but I didn't really go into it. But then I thought, have a look. Well, what do Chamorro speakers do with all this Hispanic stuff in their language? Mm-hmm. And then I noticed, of course, that Spanish had quite some influence also in the grammatical system of the language. But then it's not boring what I tell you now. After some time, I think I had said everything that could be said about the Hispanization of Chamorro. And I wanted to look at Chamorro independent of the Spanish influence on the language. So Chamorro is interesting in itself, not just because of the Spanish influence. But I started because of the Spanish influence. I saw the parallels between the languages in Mexico and the languages in the Philippines and Chamorro, of course. And that's interesting. Why do so many different languages do the same when they come in contact with Spanish? Yeah, that's interesting. It's the question isn't answered yet satisfactorily. There are quite, let's say, there is a controversy in the community of linguists about how these.
All right, so that's Rlene, part of Rlene Steffy's fascinating discussion with Professor Thomas Stoltz about the evolving nature of language. And we evolve the conversation here because we bring into the KUM News Zoom room our own Tomas Manglonia and Jackie Che, who is joining us right now from the Obama Foundation Leaders in the Asia Pacific region. Jackie, Hafaday, and good morning to you.
Hafaday, good morning, everyone.
Yeah, and as I understand it, you and Rlene are not just collegial, but good friends as well.
Are you talking about Rlene Steffy?
Absolutely, the one and only.
Yes, we've met a couple years ago. She was our keynote speaker for the Women's Summit.
She's
Hi, Rlene.
she's an amazing public speaker.
Oh,
I've got
how are
30
you,
years of
Jackie?
experience there.
She really is. I miss you, Rlene. It's been a while.
Thank you very much. Miss you too. I'm going to be up in Saipan in the summer. My husband
Perfect.
My husband will be tournament director for the games.
Oh, awesome. We'd love to have you here again.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always wonderful to be back.
Mhm.
Am I done here?
Oh yeah. Thank you so much, R. Hey, so
My
make sure everybody
pleasure.
subscribe to Arlene's podcast. Listen to the full interview she's got with Professor Stoltz. Thank you, R.
Jackie, enjoy your interview. Adios,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Adios, R.
Thank you, Rlene.
Recording stopped.
All right, Jason, there you have it. We're going to have a meeting of the minds in the cinema this summer, and we're so grateful to have Jackie. Jackie is one of the newest members of the Obama Leaders Cohort